Hi, my name is Skelly. Welcome back. Hey, you're my friend, right? I can talk to you. I have something to get off my mind. This might come as a surprise to some of you, but as soon as we load into the game, it hit me. Not the network errors, or the fact that I was even lucky enough to get into this network test. No, what hit me was the music. Once I loaded into the game, I wandered around and got a feel for it. It felt like Elden Ring, of course, but with a few notable changes. Right away, I noticed the iconic Sekiro jump. You know what I didn't know? In Sekiro, you're able to jump towards a wall and then press the jump input again to launch yourself a second time. Pretty epic. Also, of course, there was the new class system and the new abilities to go along with those classes. At first, it was a little weird messing around with those, but you get used to it. The ability system is similar to something like Overwatch, where you have your base abilities, an ult, and a cooldown to go along with it. On the first night, the network itself was down, but I still took that time to get a feel for the new mechanics, and in all that downtime, I got really good at parrying this little guy. Anyway, so during the network test, there was only 4 classes. The first class was Wilder, your typical knight class. For the main ability, you had a grapple hook, which you can use for traversal, dodging, pulling yourself to big enemies, or even pulling small enemies towards you. This was really fun in combination with the ult. The ult for Wilder is a big old arm cannon, kind of like the stake driver from Bloodborne. Something else to note is that the classes usually have different kinds of dodges or slightly different movement, as well as unique movesets for certain weapons. For Wilder, you just get the typical Elden Ring roll. The second class was Duchess, a speedy assassin type character that has a unique moveset with daggers. Their main ability is kind of interesting. It replays the last few seconds of damage that the enemy receives, essentially doubling, increasing their output. And the ultimate ability just turns you and nearby allies invisible. The next class we're going to talk about is the Guardian, our big old bird friend. This class is your typical tank role, and your main ability causes a whirlwind around you that can launch smaller enemies. And the ultimate ability is really cool. You can launch it in the air and do a big slam attack, but if you hold the button down, it buffs nearby allies and gives you a lot of poison damage resistance. The next class is the Recluse, a mage character. Her skill makes it to where when you hit enemies with an elemental attack, it gives you a charge. Once you have 3 full charges, you can release an ability based on the elemental damage you did. The Recluse's ultimate ability marks enemies you hit. Marked enemies get debuffed, and once you or allies hit them, you restore FP and HP. After messing around, we start night 1. I choose Wilder because big night guy. Right away, I drop in and I start looking for loot. In this game, the goal is to survive 3 nights total. At the end of each night, you fight a random boss. However, on the last night, you fight Gladius, this network test's big baddie. Before nightfall, your goal is to gear up and grab as much loot as possible while there's a storm closing in around you. You can gear up by exploring and looting, doing mini bosses, or even exploring little mini dungeons. Bonfires are interesting in this game. Since stats are based on the characters you pick, leveling up is pretty linear. Just being near a bonfire will restore your Estus so you can grab it on the run. Also, bonfires get disabled when consumed by the storm. Checking back in on my run, the storm closes in and a boss fight approaches. We get a Centipede Demon. Weird, right? Well, in this game, it seems like they're going to be bringing back some of the Souls bosses and maybe Bloodborne? The Centipede Demon specifically is from Dark Souls 1. And shout out Lost Izalith, gotta be one of my favorite places to never be. They give you a little boss fight foreplay by spawning in little enemies that you can kill before the main boss spawns. Personally, I could do without the first part, because 1, I'd rather get right into the action, and 2, my dumb self loses all my Estus before the boss fight even begins. The returning bosses seem to be revamped a bit. Centipede Demons seem to have a few new tricks, as well as Morgott getting a few new moves in his kit. But with all of our new moves, it really just serves to mix everything up a bit. Reviving in this game is pretty funny, and it took me a little bit to figure it out. All you have to do to revive in this game is just beat the shit out of your teammate. During the network test, multiplayer passwords weren't really working, so you couldn't play with friends. And the solo queue experience was definitely a mixed bag.
Riot Shield! I'm a that use Riot Shield!
Overall though, solo queuing with randoms wasn't so bad, and once the game comes out, you'll be able to play on your own in a single player mode. Something interesting about the final night in the network test is that you don't really get to prepare the same way you do during the other nights. On the final night, you get thrust into this room, you get a Grace shops and a place to upgrade your weapon. Which reminds me, during the exploring sections of Night Reign, there are places like shops and anvils where you can upgrade weapons as well as purchase useful items. Personally, the final boss for the network test has become one of my favorites. The fight is just so cool visually, and I love the aesthetic. Gladius is this hellhound type, Cerberus type, freaky little dog guy that I just think is so cool. His main way of attacking is grabbing this chainsword from his back and swinging it all around the arena. It's just so cool. Something interesting about this boss is that he can split into 3 separate dogs and chase around each player individually, or sometimes all 3 chase one unlucky player. The pacing of the fight, even with all 3 dogs chasing you at once, is pretty good, but it does make me wonder what the single player experience for this fight will be. I thought the fight was really cool, and I'm really excited to spend more time with it once the game comes out. So now that I've run down what Night Reign is, I'd like to go over with you guys how I feel about the whole thing and my experience overall. I thought the pacing was maybe a little fast and getting geared up in time was pretty tight, although I did find a way around it that we'll get to later. Since the map is smaller here, you don't get access to torrent, but you do get plenty of new ways to move around. One of the first things you might notice are these little spirit spring things similar to the ones you could use a torrent. They just launch you into the sky. And we already found some pretty creative uses for it. Another thing you can use are these little perches you glide from using these little spirit bird guys. Interestingly, there's not a lot of control once you're on it, but it gets the job done. Another interesting thing about Night Reign is that there is no fall damage. This helps a ton with Traversal, but I can't help but miss the good old days where falling 2 feet would obliterate you. So going back to something I was talking about earlier, in Night Reign you have to gear up by killing bosses and collecting loot. The timing on this feels pretty tight, but I ended up finding a way that was pretty fast. So in base game Elden Ring, you have these flame chariots, right? They're pretty tanky and annoying to kill, but there's a couple ways around it. One of the ways to get around this is to literally go around it. If you go on the back of the flame chariot, you can stab the little guy in the back and do a good chunk of damage. However, this is still pretty tedious, and in Night Reign, they're pretty tanky. Another mechanic you might know about to take out these flame chariots is to drop down onto their head and get a plunging attack. This will instantly kill them. Although in base Elden Ring, it's pretty niche and you don't get a lot of chances to do this, so it's pretty balanced. Think back a bit though. Remember when I was telling you about that double jump mechanic where you can bounce off a wall to get some extra height? Well, as soon as I saw that the flame chariots were a boss, I started looking for ways to get on top of it. Nearby walls, boxes, things like that. And sure enough, we were able to get on top of it and get that insta-kill. Here's the thing though, what I eventually figured out is you can jump off the chariot itself. Yeah, pretty broken, and since they count as a boss fight, you get some pretty great loot for not a lot of effort. This became a staple of my runs almost instantly, and it made a lot of the early game way easier. It's a pretty silly mechanic, or maybe oversight, that you can just straight up jump onto their head with no issue at all. I don't see it as a huge issue, as it rewards the player for having prior knowledge of Elden Ring, or even just figuring things out for themselves. It's just something funny that came up and became a huge part of every run. From the time I had with Night Reign, I really enjoyed the gameplay loop. I didn't at first, but I warmed up to it pretty fast. It's engaging, it's fun, and it's just more Elden Ring. I can see how this will get repetitive pretty fast, but as long as they give a good amount of content, it'll be a fun little side thing to do while we wait for the next Souls game. It's definitely the kind of game I can see myself having a ton of fun of playing with friends, and I'm sure there's a ton of potential for challenge runs. Stay tuned. Although it's not the best experience I've ever had, I can easily recommend this game for the price, and if you love Souls games, you'll have a ton of fun. Something I do have to call out though is the way that monetization is handled in this game, and while it's not the worst thing I've ever seen, it's worth bringing up. The base game of Elden Ring Night Reign is $40 USD, which seems totally fair as the game is simple, and if they give it enough content, I don't see why that price is an issue. The thing I needed to mention though is that for an extra $15, you can get additional characters and bosses. It's not a huge price difference, and other games have done this kind of thing before, but not FromSoft. Gating boss fights by an additional paywalls is a little weird to me, especially considering that this isn't some big DLC for the game like Shadow of the Erdtree or the Ringed City. It's a little scary to see, and I hope it doesn't become a trend in future FromSoft titles. That's all though, it's just something to keep in mind, and if you don't want to fork over the extra money, I don't blame you. It's time for everybody's favorite part of YouTube videos where I ask you to do a bunch of stuff. So please stick around. Just so you know, dude, I stream on Twitch and it's a great time. You should stop by. As well as Twitch, I have other socials in the description where I post funny content. And with that out of the way, take care of yourself, drink more water, and don't you dare go hollow. I'll see you next time.
Bye.